Tēnā rā tātou katoa, ko Adrian Dawson tōku ingoa. I'm one of the team leads of the Qualifications and Standards team at Muka Tangata. Thank you so much for coming along today. The presentation that you're about to see is in two parts. So the first part, which makes up the most of the presentation, is about micro-credentials, what we do and don't know, I suppose, about micro-credentials. And the second part, which is a little shorter, is to do with skill standards and the Muka Tangata approach to developing these. So let's start with micro-credentials. So on these slides, there are links to a number of other documents and so on for your information. So you will be able to get to these things via these slides, which we will send out to you. So there is quite a lot of information on the NZQA website about micro-credentials. So it includes the guidelines. There's a document about how micro-credentials can be stacked in programs leading towards qualifications. And there's a presentation that NZQA gave towards the end of last year, which you can click onto and view as well. So I've put them on there for your interest. So the Muka Tangata is involved in micro-credentials in a number of ways. So first of all, if you as a provider want to create a micro-credential that is in the industry area that we are the standard setting body for, so food and fibre, then you need to send us an application form, which is on our website, and we do an analysis of what you've created, so the learning outcomes. We have a look at the evidence that you've supplied in terms of who you've talked to in industry. And then once you've got support from us, you then submit the full application to NZQA for approval. So in that instance, we know that the forms that we've got and the forms that NZQA have created do duplicate, and we are working quite hard with NZQA to try and reduce that duplication, because we know that it's an extra step for you and we don't want to get in the way, but we do think that we have some value to add in the process. So what I tell my team when it comes to a micro-credential that's come in from you for support from us is that it's not a deep dive into your what you've developed. It's more of a sniff test. So we want to see, based on what we know of our industries and the work that we've got on to date, we want to be able to see that there's evidence that you have engaged with industry, that industry want it, and that what you've produced as a draft is acceptable to them. And then we want to see some evidence that there is some student demand for it. We shouldn't be going into the learning outcomes themselves or the content in any great detail, other than to just see whether it is in line with what we know about the industry and its needs. It also gives us an opportunity to let you know if we've got anything under development that might be covering a similar topic, which means that maybe we can take some work off your hands, or we can make sure that we keep you in the loop and that we're not unnecessarily duplicating the work that you've already undertaken. So from the beginning of last year, any new micro-credential that was listed on the framework is public property, which means that no matter who the developer is, anybody, any tertiary education organisation can apply to deliver against that micro-credential. Prior to that date, any micro-credentials that you as providers or any provider has had listed are still the intellectual property of that developer. So if you go onto the NZQA register and you see a micro-credential that you're interested in, and it was published before the beginning of last year, then you need permission from that qualification developer before you can apply for accreditation to deliver. And there may be fees involved with them, and they reserve the right to say no, because those offerings are their own, and there may be commercial sensitivities involved. So it's not all that easy at the moment to find things on the register of micro-credentials on NZQA's website. The register itself is reasonably easy to find. You can just type that into the search function. But the way that the micro-credentials themselves are listed on that register aren't searchable. So you can't type in, I only want to see level 2 primary industries and only get that list. You just have to keep scrolling down the full list of micro-credentials. That I'm sure as that list gets longer and longer, they will think about looking for a search function, but at the moment that isn't there. It also doesn't give you, you can't click through to the full document of the full micro-credential document. So what you see on the NZQA register is title, level, credit, a sort of summary of the skills and knowledge that a student would have upon completion, and that's it. So it doesn't include the indicative content, and it doesn't include the learning outcomes or any of the detail that you as a provider might need when you're putting together your program. So it does tell you the developer, however. So what you can do is, if you see something on the register that you think looks interesting, then you contact the deliverer. So in that case, we encourage you to come to us if it's a Muka Tangata micro-credential, and we will supply you with the full document and talk to you about what we might need to see and what NZQA is looking for when it comes to accreditation to deliver against that micro-credential. In terms of the micro-credentials that we as Muka Tangata will develop ourselves, there's a few things to our approach. So we will do one-off development of micro-credentials for something niche or perhaps an emerging skill that where there isn't currently a qualification that covers it, or there aren't any standards, or if something is deemed urgent. And those one-off developments are for things where there isn't already a qualification review underway, or there isn't likely to be soon, where there is a demonstrated need and demand and has been through an internal process ourselves. So if you have a fantastic idea for a new micro-credential and you think it's something that we might be interested in, by all means do contact us, and we will put it through a test to see whether or not it meets those requirements, that it is not something that we're already working on, that there is obviously some need, or at least there's some need for us to explore it further. And we'll have to look at what we've already got on our work plan and see whether or not what you are bringing to us, or what the industry has brought to us, will make that priority, and then we might need to shift some other things further down on our list. When we are conducting new qualification development projects, either a review of an existing qualification suite or a completely new qualification development. We are pretty keen to develop where we think it would be helpful and necessary to develop micro-credentials that would align with the graduate profile outcomes, so that some students may be able to use those micro-credentials as a taster, where they might just enrol in perhaps the first micro-credential or the first graduate one that links to the first graduate profile outcome in a qualification, get a bit of a feel for it, and then if they're keen, they can enrol in a program leading to the full qualification. We will also consider developing micro-credentials where we might see that there is a bit of a gap in our current pathway. So, for example, where we have a level 3 qualification, let's say it's aquaculture, and we have a level 4 qualification, but we've been getting some feedback that people are finding the jump between level 3 and 4 quite difficult for students to manage. And so what they would like us to do is to create a pathway or a stepping stone in between those two qualifications, where they don't need a full qualification, but there is just, there might be just a skill gap that we could help students to navigate. We also, in terms of the how we decide whether or not or which graduate profile outcome in a qualification that we might want to develop a micro-credential against, we will be focusing on core transferable skills that can be used in multiple contexts. So ideally, for example, if there was a core component in a graduate profile outcome that was to do with wellbeing and communications, we could create a micro-credential in that, and that then could be picked up and used in other qualifications across the food and fibre suite of quals. So yes, as I say, it is still a bit of a work in progress. We are trying not to duplicate what NZQA do for approval, and there is a project happening at the moment with the moderation team inside Muka Tangata, who are working really closely with NZQA to see whether or not they could be looking at program endorsements together, like a panel approach to looking at those documents that you're sending in, rather than us doing it first and then sending it to NZQA and so on. So they are going to pilot that as a new process, and we're really hopeful that if that works, that we can institute a similar approach to micro-credential support, so that you don't have to come to us first and go through our process and then do it again with NZQA. We are still coming to grips with the new template, I suppose, of micro-credentials, and trying to get the balance right in terms of the indicative content and the must-haves. So NZQA have confirmed that the section of a micro-credential that is entitled indicative content is indicative, so it is not compulsory, that any provider does all of the things, all of the topics, covers all of the topics that might be in the list of indicative content. So we are still trying to make sure that we give you enough of the learning outcomes are really clear, and you know what you have to cover, and you know what must be assessed, and that then anything extra that we think might be helpful to you in terms of giving you a steer for developing your program is in that indicative content. So we have heard that in some instances the learning outcomes have been too broad and too generic, and then it has been difficult for you to work out what it is that's needed in your programs. And of course, the other extreme as well, where perhaps we've we've erred on the side of being a bit too prescriptive in the learning outcomes, and haven't given you enough flexibility to develop a program that's going to be right for your region and your cohorts. So yeah, always keen to get feedback, and you know, we do develop these credentials with a committee or with a group of people, of representatives from across both the industries and providers. So hopefully, you know, the better we get at writing these, and the more and the better relationships we develop, you know, there shouldn't be so much distance there in terms of what we create and what you're able to then develop. In terms of stacking micro-credentials, so NZQA have informed us that we can't stack micro-credentials structurally inside a qualification. So we can develop a micro-credential, and we can even say in the qualification that X micro-credential can be mapped against the graduate profile outcome of this qualification, but they're not structurally embedded in the qualification itself when it comes to award. So if you want to be able to award a micro-credential that meets a graduate profile outcome, you still need to go through a process of having the micro-credential, of having accreditation to deliver of that micro-credential in order for that micro-credential to be awarded. If we have developed a set of micro-credentials that do map against the graduate profile outcome, that it doesn't mean you have to do that. So you could still, even if we've developed 6 micro-credentials that map against 6 graduate profile outcomes, you as a provider do not have to do them. You can still just create one program that meets all of the requirements of those graduate profile outcomes and award the qualification at the end. In terms of the timing, so if you did want to be able to get accreditation to deliver and stack the micro-credentials inside your program, you are able to do that. Ideally, NZQA would like to see that at the same time as you apply for the overall program approval. So they may still allocate the micro-credential accreditation to deliver separately to a different evaluator as the one who's doing your program overall program approval leading to a qual, but they would like to see them all together so they can get a really clear understanding of what it is that you intend to do and how it is that you intend to kind of manage and sequence and all of those things in terms of stacking micro-credentials inside your program. We are still talking to NZQA about the use of micro-credentials as exit awards. So they are very comfortable with the idea that a student may enrol in a program leading towards a micro-credential, be awarded that micro-credential, and then decide to enter into a program leading towards the full qual and have that micro-credential as a credit transfer or an exemption into that program. They are less comfortable with the idea that a student might enrol into a full program and then exit early or withdraw from a program leading to a full qualification and be awarded a micro-credential at that point. It's not impossible, but it's early days in terms of what that might look like in terms of approval for those elements inside your program. But watch this space, because we're definitely working on it. And in terms of RPL, so where it's clear that a micro-credential has been developed specifically to meet the the requirements of a graduate profile outcome, you should be able to treat that as credit transfer or exemption if a student presents and they've been awarded that micro-credential, so you don't have to go through RPL. But if they've presented with a micro-credential that hasn't been mapped against an existing qualification, then you will need to treat anybody who's presenting with that micro-credential as an RPL candidate. So I just wanted to stop here and perhaps give you a bit of food for thought. So what I've told you to date is what we know. Micro-credentials are quite a new product in the system, both overall and in their current state. So we're still learning a little bit about what NZQA's vision is for how they will be used. And I think it's fair to say that in our conversations with industry to date, they are very excited by the prospects. And I think their appetite for micro-credentials has taken everybody a bit by surprise. So I don't think at the moment that the TEC systems or the way that provision is allocated in terms of the mix of provision has quite caught up with the fact that there is a lot of demand for micro-credentials. So my understanding is that there's still something of a cap in terms of the amount of an organisation's mix of provision that can be dedicated towards micro-credential delivery. So I think that there's a conversation to be had with you, with TEC, with NZQA, and with industry to try and gauge the level of that demand and perhaps have a conversation with TEC for them to alter the settings somewhat so that if industry and learners and providers are all keen on offering micro-credentials, that there isn't these setting barriers that are getting in the way. As I said before, at the moment, we can't embed micro-credentials structurally into a qualification. So what that means is that you cannot, as a learner, have been going along your way, collecting micro-credentials that happen to meet the graduate profile outcome of a qualification and then present them for award without having to go to a provider, enroll in a program leading to the qualification and then going through credit transfer or RPL if necessary for that. The only way to be awarded a full qualification currently is to go through a provider to have that happen. So we can't fully stack. There is no sort of fully stacking a qualification from our perspective. We think that this misses an opportunity for students. We would like to see a day where a student could present with a collection of micro-credentials that they've been awarded over the years, and there would be a mechanism for fully awarding the qualification if that was appropriate. So we're still having some conversations with NZQA about that. In the meantime, we are starting to think about whether there are other things that we could be doing, perhaps developing capstone micro-credentials that could be used because to ensure to give the provider an opportunity for an enrolment for that final award of the qualification, and also so that they can then have a look at whether or not what the learner has gained over that period of time that they were undertaking the micro-credentials has been integrated and fully encapsulates the aim and the graduate outcomes of that full qualification. And to the point regarding core transferable skills, so my Chief Executive, Jeremy Baker, is very keen on us developing micro credentials that are truly portable, and skill standards that are portable, that a learner can be awarded in one context and then bring into another context and have those credits count. And one of the ways is to develop skill standards and micro credentials that describe these skills slightly out of context, perhaps, so that we don't say communication in the aquaculture industry, so that we say communication skills are these things. It's a skills first approach, and they can be applied in multiple contexts. And if we truly think that these foundational skills are the very building blocks for good participation in our vocational education system, that they create lovely pathways and testers for young people in particular to come into our industries and stay there, then perhaps there's an argument that those foundation level skills and the programs to deliver against them should be funded at a higher rate, because they are so important. So yeah, again, that's a conversation that we will continue to have. We do have a function as a Workforce Development Council to provide advice to TEC. So it does give us an option, an opportunity rather, to play something of an advocacy role in matters of funding. Okay, so I think that's about it for what we do and don't know about micro credentials and some of the conversations that are going on. So now I'd like to just move on to skills standards. So we have yet to have any skill standards listed on the framework as Muka Tangata. There is a collection of, I think, maybe 6 to 10 skill standards that have been listed that you can go on and have a look at. They start at 40,000 in terms of their number. So there's 40,000 and 40,001 and 40,002. So you can go onto the framework and type that number in, and you can have a look at some examples of skill standards that have been registered. And now that we can see those, and we've had some early drafts of skill standards that we've put together, looked at by NZQA, and so we're starting to collect a bit of evidence, some exemplars, if you will, so that we can get more of a steer about what it is that these new products are and aren't. In terms of our approach to developing skill standards, so we've got a few sort of basic design principles that we want to apply. We want them to be larger in credit size than unit standards have been in the past. So we don't want them to be 1 credit and 3 credits. So on, we want them to be a more significant piece of learning, unless, of course, there is a very, very good reason for something that perhaps might be regulatory or something where it's vital that it's just that piece of learning, and then we might be able to develop a skill standard. We want the focus to be slightly more holistic and more skills-based as opposed to task-based or role-based. So the skill standard itself should describe the underlying skills of a person undertaking a role, not a description of the role. And the skills that underpin a certain task, not the task necessarily itself. And certainly one of the biggest differences I think you'll see is this addition of learning outcomes. So instead of the unit standards, which were assessment tools, so what you ended up with was a document that described the assessment conditions and what a student needed to do for the purposes of assessment. It didn't really tease into as much the skills that they have attained. It was more about how can they prove that they can do these things. So it would be describe the legislation for something and build a wall. So what we want to be able to do with the learning outcomes is that it gives us an opportunity to focus more on those skills, to create some natural stopping points that might occur in delivery. So where how you might sequence the delivery against a particular skill. So it might, the first learning outcome might be about sort of introduction to a particular skill set and what that looks like, and then the second learning outcome might be the way that the student is taking that learning and applying it. But we are trying really hard to not just make the skill standards be bigger than unit standards, but basically the same. So that what we're trying to work out, what is the special sauce that makes a skill standard different to a unit standard. As I said, there are a few examples now on the framework at the 40,000, starting at 40,000. There is also, if you go onto the NCQA website, there's a guidance document there for skill standards. There's a template, and they do have a few samples, some draft samples from earlier before they did list those new skill standards, so you can go in and have a bit of a look at that. Again, it's all still pretty new, so it's likely that we won't get the balance quite right. At the moment, the things that we are talking about are trying to see what the difference is between that indicative content inside a qualification, inside a skill standard, and the must-haves, which are in the learning outcomes. We've also made some decisions around what the transition period will be for unit standards to skill standards. So what we have decided is that we will have a long lead-in time. So we will develop skill standards to replace unit standards over time. But because the skill standards will be different, they won't be just a straight one-to-one replacement of the unit standards. What we want to do is roll over the existing unit standards and give providers such as yourselves a long time to teach out, to make sure that you can use your current consent to assess and your current programs and go through a full set of cohorts using those unit standards, and that when we do have the skill standards up on the framework, that you have plenty of time to develop your resources and your programs using those qualifications, so using those skill standards. So what we plan to do is to give you a long time to use the unit standards right up until the last date for assessment of the qualifications that those standards sit in, so that when you're ready to start with a new qualification, you'll have new skill standards available and you can create a full package against that. In terms of moderation, it's a bit early days, but we think that the process for moderation of those skill standards will be much the same as it is for unit standards. There's nothing to suggest at the moment that there are any extra requirements. So you will be contacted by us if a skill standard is due to be moderated, we will let you know. You will need to provide student samples and so on. So it's much the same as with unit standards. In terms of consent to assess, again, much the same. So when we create skill standards, they will sit on the framework, they will sit in domains that are currently there. So if you have consent to assess at field, subfield, or domain level, and we've put some new skill standards in there, then you will be able to continue to assess against the new ones without having to apply for consent to assess. If you currently have consent to assess against particular unit standards and unit standard numbers, then and those are expiring and we are replacing them over time with the new skill standards, then you will need to apply to us for consent to assess. But in that instance, we will those change reports will be available. They will be public. They'll be on the NZQA website. They're likely to be on our website. And then if there's been mapping done to show you where particular skills may have sat with one unit standard and we've now incorporated them into a skill standard, that mapping will be there and available for you to see as well. And I think that is the end of that. So I hope that was helpful. Feels like a lot of talking. So I hope that you've managed to last this long through this presentation, and I thank you very much for your time. And as I say, we will get the slides out to you, and you can click through to your leisure, or you can also come back to me and ask me any questions. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa.